Well, it's not working in prod. Indeed, it's not working in prod. Well, it's not my problem. It works just fine on my machine and on the dev server. Well, I told you all systems are ISOs. And if it's working in dev, it's working in prod. It's ISO? Oh, yeah. Essentially, I mean, pretty much almost. Almost? What do you mean, almost? You know, there's maybe a very small gap in minor versions. And for some plugins. Nothing particularly important. Solomon, you'll always be a coder. No, I give up. I've tried everything. Moving code from one server to another, it's a nightmare. If the code can't be free, then I must be. I'll wander from place to place, go fishing all day long. Solomon, I know you. You want to change the world. You'll never find a big idea by fishing. Ah! Solomon, are you okay? Eureka! I've got it! Well, I may not be able to type, but the project is cool, I swear. Wow, how cool. Docker is written in Go. Dude, I agree this is cool. But this code needs serious help. Just one more ticket before going to bed.
Oh yeah, this is a game changer. Pull request sent.
Hey guys, it's going crazy. There are too many pull requests from everywhere. I need help. Please, who can help me?
Nope.
Busy.
Sorry, can't do it.
I'll do it. I'll do it and I'll maintain it. Test passed. Merge it. Nobody can tell you're a turtle on GitHub.
Hello.
Oh, that was fun.
Hey, I do it.
Little Docker nostalgia.
Quite so.
Sebastiaan actually found that one for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, yesterday he kept just slacking us a bunch of shots, looks into the past. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
That was 2015, as I recall. Is that right? It seems about right.
Yes, DockerCon 2015.
And the Mountain Dew Desert Dweller, that's Tianon?
That's Tianon. Yeah. He's still around, still a maintainer.
Cool.
I recall I was at DockerCon 2015, and I recall I wanted to meet him, but I had no clue what he looked like. So actually, I had some people send me a picture as to this is the guy you're looking for, and Mountain Dew, because if you see Mountain Dew, he must be there.
Awesome. Well, let's introduce our guest, because Sebastiaan's the first Docker engineering guest on the show.
Yes.
So, Sebastiaan, do you want to maybe just do a quick intro for who you are, what you do?
I can do a short intro. So I'm Sebastiaan. I live in the Netherlands. I work at Docker. I work mostly on the Docker engine, but you will see me around anywhere because I cannot get my hands off whatever. So I started at Docker in 2015, but I was already active on the Docker project before that, and mostly in my spare time. I'm sure there's going to be more questions from you later on.
There'll be more questions. Yeah, there'll be more questions. So, well, let's just jump into some of those questions, and we'll start with when did you join Docker?
I joined Docker in 2015.
2015, but you joined. Well, when did you start working on the Docker project?
I think that is basically where this video introduction ended. That is when the pull requests started coming in. So they open sourced Docker in 2013. If I'm not mistaken, I saw it. It must have been on Hacker News, and I was working at a company doing as a PHP developer, and we were working on way too many projects all the time. And part of my job was to switch between projects because many of those were in maintenance and make quick changes between project A and project B. And then the problem becomes, how do I test my project? How do I set up my project locally to be quickly able to test how it works and if my changes work correct? And we were trying all kinds of things, VMs, Vagrant, whatnot, and none of them were really suitable for what we were doing. And then I saw Docker. And I thought, this looks damn interesting. But I knew zilch about what it was all doing. And so I started playing with it. And I mean, it was amazing. I mean, being able to start an Ubuntu container in under a second and spin up a Postgres database and just have it running was just mind-blowing. And I mean, it was an open source project at the time, and documentation was still quite behind. New features were being developed all the time, so the best source of truth was GitHub. And basically, that's what I started doing, as you reading along on GitHub, see whatever they were working on, what cool features were coming, trying to understand how it worked, because I absolutely knew nothing about it. And that's how I got involved in the project, I guess. I started looking how those pull requests came in. It was written in Golang. I knew nothing about that as well, so had to get used to the syntax, try to understand how it works. At some point, you notice that you know more than other people commenting on GitHub. And at some point, you know new answers to questions that people asked. So you start to give back. And at least that's what I did. I said, hey, I know the answer to this. So I started replying to people. I became more vocal also on pull requests if I saw changes being made that I asked, so why is it? And have you considered this as the way to do this? And that's mostly how I got involved, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a good
And then
story.
you share with internally with us the chat when I forget who it was that reached out from Docker, and was that IRC or something? Said, hey,
that was IRC. Yeah. So there were all these things I never used. I mean, the project was using IRC for communicating, so I had to learn IRC and install the client and whatnot is needed. And yeah, so through IRC at some day, and that was somewhere around 2015.
Yeah, I think it was 2015 in the timestamps. Yeah.
I got a message from Sam Alba. He was director of engineering at the time, president of engineering. I don't know, fancy title. I'm not into fancy titles. And he said, so you're doing all this work. What do you think? Do you want to be doing this full time? Because you're doing it in your spare time right now, and you're doing all this work, and we can't use you. And
Nice.
it was really nice, and I was flabbergasted as to, oh wow, that's the big Silicon Valley on the other side of the pond, right? Which is, at least from my generation and from my side of the pond, it was always this mythical area as to Silicon Valley. That's where all the really, really smart guys are, and you only get there if you are the creme de la creme of engineering. And that's always my impression was that of Silicon Valley. And then you get a call basically from around that area and telling you, hey, would you like to be working for us? So I had a call, and at the time there was talks that I would be relocating to the US, which would be involving quite a lot of stuff. I mean, I was married at the time, and we wanted to both have a working permit. And I mean, in the end, it never happened, but it took a long time before I actually joined to sort that out.
Yeah.
So I got invited, and they asked me to come over for DockerCon in San Francisco.
That was the first one.
That's I think it was the second one. There was,
it was the one after Amsterdam.
The one after Amsterdam. Yeah, so Amsterdam was the first one. So I was very active as a contributor at the time. They announced DockerCon Europe, and it was in Amsterdam, and I was super active on the repo. And then I had to get permission from a company as to get a ticket, and it was early bird pricing. So I said, "Oh, can I go to the conference?" And he said, "Well, give us a few days." And then early bird pricing ended, and I said, "Well, you need to hurry because now it's more expensive." And then it was sold out because it was pretty small. And I was gutted. Oh man, it's so close, and I would be able to meet some of the people I've been working with for over a year, and I wouldn't be able to. And I know that I left a comment even on IRC or maybe on GitHub, and I got an email from the tech writer at the time, Fred Lifton, and he sent me an email and he said, "Okay, I felt so sorry for you, so I reached out to marketing, and I may be able to still get you a ticket." And so they sent me a proposal, and I could buy a ticket, and in the end I bought it out of pocket as to I wanted to go there.
Yep. That was that little. It was a museum, right? It was like a nautical museum, like Nemo or something.
It was Nemo, indeed. I actually hadn't been there. It's more towards kids and stuff as to doing experiments with science and things. It was actually pretty fun.
Cool.
The way there was pretty fun as well, because I was on my way to DockerCon, and I was on the train, and my train got stuck. So I saw the time, and it was stuck, and I stood there, I think 300 meters outside of Amsterdam Central Station. And I stood there for half an hour or more. And so I was frustrated, and I tweeted something like, "Oh, damn, I'm going to be missing the keynote." And at that moment, I got a reply from Solomon himself. He said, "Oh, don't bother. It's boring anyway." And it was like, what?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Let's see. So you have a reputation for basically knowing everything that's going on and remembering everything that happened. And so what's your workflow for working in an open source project? Like, how do you, like, I guess, what's like the day-to-day, and how do you, because like, especially in really busy open source projects, I think it can be overwhelming. So, what do you do, and what do you recommend for folks for basically keeping tracks of the parts that they care about?
Ooh, those are two different questions, I guess.
Yep.
So what I do and what I recommend, because what I do, I definitely don't recommend. I am subscribed to just about all the repositories that Docker has and related projects. So including Containerd, Runc, Kubernetes, whatnot. So I get all those notifications in my inbox. But it turns out I'm pretty good at scanning those things and pick out things that might need attention. So also many times I just go through my inbox, scan the headlines, and pick out if something needs attention or if it's interesting, and otherwise clean them up. So my workflow is a lot around that. So I keep track of all the notifications, see if people comment on issues, which could be closed issues or older issues. So you have a check if there's something that we may be missing. Of course, there's always complainers. I mean, that's the downside of open source. So anyone is able to comment, and it's not always in the friendly way. It's also Yeah, so I mean, it is difficult because yes, I hear you and I see it, and sometimes yes, we know people need to realize that there's a finite amount of engineering available, and sometimes we need to prioritize things that are just more important or more critical to fix or to address. And then regarding feature requests, that's always difficult, especially in a project or software like Docker that's used by millions of users. Whatever change you make, you also have to maintain. And whereas some people think, hey, can you add this flag because that's very useful for what I'm working on? We have to consider, is this something useful to be adding? Are there many users that will be in the same situation? And is this actually the right solution for the problem you're having? So trying to get as much information out of the people that open the tickets or that comment is very important in my workflow. It's not just asking for a feature. It's more important to me and to the maintainers of the project as to why do you want this feature? What problem are you trying to solve? Because it's so easy to add that flag and have it fixed, and then it turned out to be not the solution, and then you already have tons of options on Docker. And some of those were maybe a bad decision in the past as to, oh yeah, we can add this option, so let's add it. And in hindsight, it wasn't great. I mean, when I started working on the project, it was, I think the README literally said as to it works on Linux and doesn't work on Windows and likely never will. That kind of changed, right?
Yeah.
So Windows is a thing. Although many people are deploying Linux containers on Windows or use it to develop Linux things, it is actually a thing now. So there's many things in Docker that were originally designed with the assumption that it would be Linux only. So paths use forward slashes. I mean, what else would be used? So there's many things like that. So we have always been very cautious as to accepting new features to be added, because we knew we also have to maintain them. And even if there's a contributor in open source that says, hey, I have the feature implemented, you cannot rely or you cannot be sure that that person will be sticking around. So if there's a lot of knowledge in that person that contributes a feature, you need to either have a guarantee that that person will continue helping out with maintaining it, or you need to absolutely own the feature to know we can maintain this, even if that person gets under a tram or whatever form of transport in that country.
Yeah, that's right. I've heard it in Docker engineering as no is temporary and yes is forever.
That's always been the motto we used as maintainers, and that's not a Docker thing. So, I mean, it's open source. People always say, okay, Docker, implement this. And from the start, it was an open source project, so it was far from Docker alone. We had people from Google, from Red Hat, from IBM that were working with us to build a project. And anyone is able to help out there or become a maintainer. Even if you are active, you can become a maintainer.
So that's a good lead into this next question, which is, they're all different, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how large open source projects are actually run. So let's just talk for a little bit about, kind of generally, or Docker as an example for, what is the difference between a maintainer, a committer, a contributor? Like, is there some projects have governance, some don't. Like, for very large projects, where there are these questions about like, hey, maybe we should or shouldn't answer this feature versus like an individual person's individual project. What do you, what can you give us like a tour of big open source, at least as you know it?
Okay, so the way I would see is, okay, there's users, people that use your products. They can participate, and I mean, if we're talking about contributors, I'd like to see contributing in a way wider scope than just adding code. As I mentioned before, if people open a feature request or a bug report, that is already contributing. If you're just using the software, that is contributing because you may have discovered that there's an issue. That's important, and I think that's a strong point of open source, is that you have a very direct channel with the people building the software and the users that use the software. So contributors, users are contributors. If you think you can add some code, you can contribute by opening pull requests. How the project is led is many, if not all, open source projects have some form of maintainers, and maintainers are mostly the gatekeepers of the project. So they would help contributors getting their code merged and reviewed. But in the end, there's also someone that needs to decide whether or not a feature gets accepted. And in Docker, that has always been the maintainers. In the past, we had someone as a BDFL of the project, so he had a final say, but I think that was mostly at the start of the project. Later on, he was too busy with the company as a whole to actually be working on that. So it was mostly the maintainers needing to reach consensus if a feature made sense or should be accepted or not. So those are the maintainers, and they decide in the end if a feature gets in or not. They also help review code and pull requests that are opened. But reviewing is open to everyone. And that's another thing I'd like, because that's how I got started. I got interested in the project. I saw pull requests, and at some point I thought, okay, I don't like this pull request, or I don't like the way it's implemented. And it's scary because at first you think there's all these very, very big minds at the other side of the pull request that know exactly what they're doing. And that's definitely not the case. They're just engineers, or they're just contributors like every developer out there. And yes, they know a lot and they have expertise in certain areas, but they may be missing things, and those things could be very trivial. So the first time I commented on a PR or on a pull request, it was super scary because I thought, this looks wrong, but that guy should be knowing what he is doing, right? So in the end, I left a comment and I got a reply. I said, oh my God, I absolutely missed this. Thank you. And that's encouraging, because at some point you grow more confidence that it's not that the other people don't know everything. So I think that's a great way to contribute. If you see a pull request and you think this is interesting, but I see something that I don't like, it's free to everyone to leave a comment and to review code.
Yeah.
And generally, what the Docker project at least has always has followed is that we had a policy of 2 LGTMs, and LGTMs is an abbreviation for looks good to me, and basically it's giving an approval as to we think this pull request is ready to go. And the reason for that is, so we have a couple of stages if we have a pull request. Depending on the type of pull request, it may be needed that you have a design review if it's a feature. Does the feature in itself, the design, the UX look great? We have a code review as to is the code sane? Does it look good? And in some cases, we have a docs review as to is the documentation that goes together with the code, is that looking good? And in the end, we need two approvals, and that's sometimes a hassle because you have one approver and maybe the pull request looks quite trivial and you think, okay, it should be fine with one. But it saved our backside on a couple of cases, even the trivial ones that you think, oh, it's just a one-line change, and that one-line change turned out to be quite essential. So it's always good to have more eyes, and that could be of a maintainer, but it could also be of a user that reads along and also does a review. So even though the LGTM of a non-maintainer doesn't count officially, it helps.
Yeah. So we got a question from the audience. Well, what platform, Windows, Linux, or Mac OS, are you guys using on a daily basis for developing?
Okay, so for the Docker engine, I think that it's mostly run by people that run on either Linux or Mac. That said, WSL2 is really amazing. I'm not a Windows guy, but I've seen so many amazing things. So I know some people switch to Windows at some point.
I did. I did during shelter in place. I switched. So I have when I used to travel a lot for Docker. And so I had one of the 12-inch MacBooks. And so I paired that up with a cloud instance. And when I would travel, that would be my laptop. And then shelter in place happened, and I retreated to the man cave. And I have a very nice gaming rig down here. It's got 16 cores and a boatload of RAM and super fast disks. And I said, I was Ben. So Ben is we'll have Ben on the show at some point. Ben is the PM for Docker Desktop, and Ben wanted more people using the Windows side and convinced me to use Windows, and I haven't gone back. So once I got it all set up, it took a while to get set up the way I like it. I'm very fussy, and my dot files actually work across both Mac and Windows. Mac and Linux. So I had to make all of that work. But yeah, I use WSL2 exclusively. So it's like I use Windows as a graphical manager. And when so I saw that WSL2 is adding Linux GUI application support. They're working on it. Yeah. They're working on it now, and they'll have it in Insiders hopefully in the next couple of months. At that point, for me at least, Windows will be just a giant X server with really nice game support. But yeah, what's your daily driver, Peter?
I'm an OS 10, Mac OS, I think they call it now. Guy, I switched over. It was Windows for years. Because that was I had OS 10 when it first came out, I think in 01, 02, something like that. Because it was, I'd play around with Linux and Windows, but Linux, the windowing and, it was just rough, right? So I was doing a lot of Java development. So I'd dev on the Windows box, but then everything was running on Linux. And then OS 10 came out. And it had the not Linux underneath, but a Unix-like, right? The BSD. And I was like, oh, cool. A better UI and then a power of Unix underneath. So I switched and loved it. But at work, I was still on Windows. I did a lot of .NET. But then when Node came out, and then I had done a lot of JavaScript, a lot of hand coding JavaScript because no one else would do it. And it was like, this was cool. It was the Wild Wild West. And you could change strings and the numbers and do all kinds of crazy stuff. You could still do, but anyways. And then when Node came out, I I was like, okay, I'm going to switch to Mac full time, right? Because now I can run JavaScript everywhere. And so I switched over to a Mac and have used it ever since. But I also don't maintain, right, the engine, Docker engine, right? So I think it would be hard. I would think on, I don't know. I don't think you could do it on OS 10, right? You would need to run inside of a VM or something. But yeah, I have a Windows, I have a Surface, and I use that for WS2 and teaching and training and stuff. But yeah, I hate to say it. Maybe I'm a closet fanboy of Apple fanboy. Is that too harsh? Right? I don't admit that usually, but yeah, I just like Apple products. I just think they have really great hardware too.
Yeah.
But the Surface that I got is great. It's pretty slick. It's me just trying, like, I can't copy and paste in Windows anymore because it's the wrong keys, right? So it's like,
sure.
I mean, so it's like, those are my big complaints, like the stupid little things. But yeah, I think like you, Chad, I need to just like put my Mac aside and just use Windows and say, I'm going to use it for all next month or something, right?
Yeah, that's what I did. And I'll happily, at some point on like a Tuesday stream or something, we can walk through my setup. Omer, so happy to hear that you've converted to Docker Desktop. We dropped a whole bunch of new features into stable, the last stable release, which came out I think last week or the week before, and one of those things was the new cloud integration stuff. So if you are on stable and you haven't tried it, go try it. But Sebastiaan, I think one thing I have, and this is about OS, so I came from Apache projects, like the Apache Foundation projects, which have all the same governance, and they have sort of I'd say a strict path. How does in Docker project, how does someone become a committer, or how do they, what's the path? Because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand, like, if you, I guess to use the Kubernetes communities, if you chop wood and carry water, like you could become a committer without having to work at a given place. So, what's that look like for Docker? I know we haven't done it in a while, but if you wanted to, what would that look like?
It is mostly just becoming one. And that may sound odd, but what we always said is you can become a maintainer by being a maintainer. The moment you participate in a project, much of open source is about trust. I mean, in the end, you're working together with colleagues in different companies, different countries that you've never seen. And so the only communication you have is, okay, we have Slack now, but mostly it is GitHub itself. So you interact with people, and at some point, the person that comes back, you get a certain bonding, and okay, this person can be trusted. So if I have a review of this person, I know this person knows how to review a pull request. So if this person says it looks good to them, you know at some point, okay, the code is good. And that's roughly with all the tasks we have. So we also have specific tasks for people that only do triage. So that's actually how I started. I started doing triage so I could close issues or label issues or things like that, and grew to be a maintainer after that. But yeah, it's mostly become one. So start participating. You can get on our community Slack as well. If you have questions, you can always send me a message. If you have questions as to how do I do this, or how can I do that?
Yeah, that's a great point.
And you may be added as a maintainer or as a curator, how we call the people doing the triage at some point. I know I've added some people not too long ago as a triager, they were commenting on issues and they were asking for more information from other users. And that can be a hassle if you cannot label tickets, or if you cannot close issues if they should be closed. So I gave them permissions to do so. And yeah, that's mostly how it works. So become a maintainer, and then at some point it can be official.
Yeah, so this is the Docker community page, which has a nice little button here for joining Slack. I think a lot of people don't necessarily know about the Docker community Slack, so it's a great resource. And then there's some others. At some point we should update this for this show. Events are a little bit short right now, but the community Slack is a good place to be. Good examples, if you're using like GitHub Actions, there's a channel for the new Docker GitHub Actions on that community Slack with Crazy Max in there, who and some of the other authors, and I'm in there, who can help you. I think it's another way, like, and I think you were saying this before, Sebastiaan, like you don't have to type curly braces to contribute, right? Like you can be active in the Slack or be active in an IRC, or you can
definitely, yeah.
Actually, one of the ones, and Peter did this the other day, and I forgot about it entirely. But you can go to the docs and hit edit this page, and it'll take you directly into making a doc change. And so if you see something broken, you can fix it, and you can help us. And that's another like documentation and just helping communities, a wonderful way to get started.
Yeah, the documentation is definitely easy to contribute to if you see things that need changes. So there's the edits there. So for the other projects, there are possibly some other steps involved. For legal reasons, we require commits that are contributed to have a sign-off, which is basically just mentioning your name and email address at the end of the commit message. And that is to tell, so the code I contributed is either my own, or the person that wrote the code gave me permission to contribute it to open source. We don't require that for the documentation, so that's definitely easier to contribute as a first point if you don't have all the experience yet. And yes, Slack, absolutely. So we created the Slack channels because we wanted to have a place where users of our software and other projects were able to chat with each other. Also to have people actually working on the projects being there. But as you can imagine, if there's millions of users and there's, I don't know how many engineers do we have and working on the projects, that doesn't scale, right? I cannot answer every person out there. So it's great if there's people from the community helping out there and answering other questions that people may have.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So this is a good sort of question from the community. So Tobogo asks, what's the best approach to get started with Docker in an existing organization that's heavy investments in VMs and doesn't necessarily want to change? I have my own opinion, but Peter or Sebastiaan, what do you think is the right way to basically recruit or onboard people into Docker, into like an organization?
You want to? Well, let me go first, Sebastiaan, because I won't give the right way. You threw the right way in there. I mean, give me a curveball. I don't know, like most things, right? There's a whole bunch of different approaches, but I saw this before I came to Docker when, so that was, I don't know, 3 years ago, right? When it was pretty brand new. No, not everybody was using it. It was probably what's happening at your company right now, right? It's like, well, we have VMs. Why do that? Anyway, so, we started using it locally and started understanding the power, right? Like Sebastiaan said earlier, it's super easy to fire up a database in a container and it just works. that was huge for me at the beginning, right? Because I could have multiple databases, different versions, all running locally. I didn't have to install them and manage them and, all that type of stuff. Like if I need to fire up MySQL, I just put it in a container really fast. So that's one way. And then going into the VMs, I think, even if you just have the Docker engine running in your VM and you just run single containers, it's just because that's what you're going to do in the VM anyways. You're going to run a process, right? Now the process is just wrapped in Docker. It's nice and packaged, easier to maintain, easier to update. I really saw the power of it. I was working with some of our devs in the Ukraine, and we had an EC2 server for a client that we had up and running, and we were trying to mess around with networking and IAM rules, and that gets all sticky, right? And we're having an issue. Well, to be able to take up and down a little web server really fast on that box, we had a Docker engine running, and you could just fire up. He installed the engine, and then you could fire up Nginx real quick, pull it back down, put it on different ports. I mean, I was like, how is he doing this, right? I'm sitting on my side of the world. He's on the other side of the world. And he's bringing up this Nginx and other super. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm using Docker. So I was like, I think that's a good way. And then, even if it's just in your local dev, and then I don't know if many people out there do like dev integration environments where just the developers are bringing code together real quickly, right? Stuff that you own, like start playing around with it there. And I think a lot of the change comes from the bottom up, right? Yeah. And the FUD, if you address the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of the ops folks, right? Like, no, you're not going to lose your job. VMs are not going away, right? It's just a little bit of a paradigm shift. That's one way off the top of my head, right? It's not ideal, and you don't get Kubernetes, and you're not doing all this orchestration and service meshes and whatever else is cool on Hacker News, right? But it's so much easier to go from configuring, installing your app on a, just putting Docker engine and running Docker, right?
Yeah,
it's huge. Yeah,
100%. What are you, Sebastian? What are your thoughts on?
I agree with most of that. So I would say at least start small. Don't get crazy from the start. There's a lot of material out there about containers, ranging from very simple use cases to you need to run a full-fledged Kubernetes cluster to run your blog or whatnot. Start small, and also consider that not everything has to be containerized. You can start with some parts of your code that you run in a container. It could be that you still want your database to be managed by your cloud provider or your existing solution. I mean, it's not it's not all or nothing. You can create combinations. And
yeah,
what I definitely liked about Docker when I started using it is it gave me a very easy way to have a rinse and repeat, make mistakes and do it again approach.
Yeah.
So how I started is literally at the start, just run an interactive container, do the steps I wanted to do. So to install my software, to configure it. And I took notes, and in the end, I copied those steps to a Docker file. And now I could repeat it, and I could give it to a colleague of mine. And
almost like a REPL.
Yes. So I could make mistakes, and I screwed up. Okay, restart it again from where I left off. And I think that is important. That is something I see many users think is they think that Docker build or push or creating your images is scary. And I see many people basically starting a container and modifying that container, and now they have the environment that they want. I would say it's good to get started or to get your basics, but in the end, you want things to be repeatable, because that is a big advantage of running with Docker and containers, that things are way more repeatable. So you can define what your stack should be looking like in a Docker file and a Docker Compose file. You can commit those to your source control, and now you don't have to explain to anyone else as to how do I do this.
Yep.
Because it's all there.
Yeah.
And
so,
if you modify it manually, it's basically the same as just making changes in prod. and don't do that.
Yeah.
Exactly. So pulling in a comment from Omer, which is basically right here, right? Having a consistent approach for building, shipping, right, and deploying. I think, I agree with everything that you guys said. And maybe it's just because I used to be an operator. I used to be a grumpy system admin.
What happened to the beard?
I never had a beard. Can't grow one. So never did. But don't underestimate the power of suck. Like if your workflow sucks today and you make it just a little bit better, people will migrate to that. They will move. Like the power of suck is hard. And so like just incremental, like, oh man, this build takes forever, and you use Docker and then the build cache, because maybe you use Node or you use whatever, and the build cache saves you. And then people get a little bit faster loop. And like, well, that's awesome. Or it's because, whatever your environment is, I'm guaranteeing there's friction. So just find those little points where Docker takes out that friction. And even if you just do it for you, like your mental health is worth it. But what'll happen is, and I've seen this a lot, is that somebody will see that your flow is better. And they'll say, how do you do that? Like exactly what Peter was talking about with the guy in the Ukraine. He could iterate faster. He could test to try to solve a problem faster. Well, how are you doing that? That looks like magic. Well, I'm just using Docker, and I can give you the exact commands that I'm doing, and now you can do it. And I think if you even if you use Docker for just dev, then you will get people through basically taking out friction and having your work be a little bit more enjoyable. And then from what Peter said is, even if you use Docker just as a packaging tool in the beginning, you just run it on a server. You've got an engine, you've got no orchestration, you're just using it to package up dependencies. That's still better. That's incrementally better than what you had before. And then you can, like, it might take you years to fully move a direction, but hopefully you've got a much better life during that time.
Yeah.
And sometimes simple is good as well, because that's what I've seen. I mean, I mentioned it before with Go full-fledged Kubernetes orchestration and whatnot, but even in Docker, there's things that can be very simple. And don't be surprised if sometimes it is just that simple. I've seen people getting really overcomplicated, doing really overcomplicated things, and asking them, so why did you do so? Well, I saw some examples somewhere, and I thought the original one was one line that couldn't be right. And sometimes it is right. Sometimes it doesn't take much to do something that you want to do.
Yeah, we still have clients. Chris still running this old company. When I came, we still have clients that are running single EC2 instance, Docker Compose up, and you got your front end, your API, and then database is in a hosted provider. But runs, and these aren't toy applications, right? These are production applications for and identity management, insurance companies, right? These are big applications, which is simple.
Yep.
Just simple.
So there's a couple of things you must do. So don't run privileged if you don't have it. So the -- privileged flag was the biggest mistake we ever made. It basically disabled all security that a container has. So if you see a container running with -- privileged, only do so if you absolutely know what you're doing. You can just hack the host if you have privileged enabled. The other thing is, if you do run your containers and you want to deploy them to production or something that you don't have full control over, make sure that you set limits on your containers. So restrict their memory, restrict their CPU, maybe some other things that you want to be restricting. By default, a container should be secure, so it is impossible to get out of the container. At least, I think Jess Frizzell's test project still hasn't been No one got the flag there.
Yeah, no one's.
So it is secure, but the options you set when running a container matter. So if you allow a container to get access to files on the host or give it more privileges than it has by default, you're punching holes in the security. So you must be sure what you're setting for those options, and you must be sure to restrict what the container can do.
Yeah.
That's good. So I guess there's 2 questions and we're running out of time. So there's 2 questions left.
Oh.
I think this one's good because it points me to one of my favorite things to talk about on this show. So Himanshu, hello from India. Thanks for the Docker dashboard. Is it possible in the future we can pull images from the GUI like in Kitematic? So you're welcome. We love the dashboard. For those of you who haven't tried it, in Docker Desktop, there is the new Docker dashboard. It's a graphical way to see your containers and interact with them. The answer to this is I actually don't know, but I do know how you can find out, which is to go to the roadmap. And this is another one of those nice ways that you can contribute without typing curly braces. And so the Docker roadmap is what we're working on. And one of the things in here is also what you would like to see. And so you'll see there's lots of Docker Desktop, lots and lots of Docker Desktop. Docker Images UI is in here. So, I think this is a good way for folks to start to look at contributing and telling us. And then it's back to Sebastian's earlier point is, we don't make changes quick, actually, we don't make changes quickly. If there's a fix that needs to go quickly, that's something we do quickly. But expanding the surface of the function is not something that we do super quickly, typically. But when we see strong signal from the community that something would alleviate pain, and you talk to us about how that looks, it makes it a lot easier for us to make a change quickly. And so the roadmap is a great place to go do that.
And it's definitely an Edge, because I'm running Edge. I don't know if it's out there yet, but you can see your images in the repo. I don't think, now if you're talking about pulling, an arbitrary image like Redis or something, I don't think it's in the GUI yet.
I think you remember like Kitematic had like the little store, like the app store, and you could go find, and it had a handful, and you could just click Redis and pull it.
So I know they added pull options for your own images.
Yeah, for your own,
And it wouldn't surprise me that they added for other images as well. So like Kitematic, as far as I know, but people need to get back to the time if Ben is on your show.
We got to get. I think Ben would be fun. The trick is our show is early enough for us and late enough for y'all that sometimes that's painful. Speaking of which, I really appreciate you staying late. I know it's like that. All right, last question, and it's a little bit of a different one, but let's just chat about it. So if you have all Git repos for each of your different components, how might you use Docker Compose? I'll save mine for last because I talk a lot. So
this one's I saw that in the chat, and I was like, ooh, that's a tough one, right? I've thought a lot about that. I don't think there's one single answer, right?
I don't think there's not one for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a problem we can address, right? I'll go put it in the roadmap. I'll eat our own dog food, right? I think it's something to address, right? Because and a lot of the samples that I do and examples, right? If you have multiple services, right, we put them all in one Git repo for simplicity, right? And then you could put a Docker Compose file at the top, right? And it can orchestrate all of them, locally orchestrate them. using that orchestrate in double quotes there. So, yeah, I've thought about doing it a separate repos, like a master or umbrella repo, right? That holds your compose and maybe multiple composes. And then you have to do a get latest on everything, right? And set up your directory structure and have that compose, that other get repo sitting on top of it, or at least being able to sitting side by side and then having relative paths into the rest of your stuff where each of your Docker files are at and all that good stuff. Yeah, it becomes a little tricky. I don't have a perfect answer for that. And I've tried a couple different workflows. Yeah, I wasn't, let's say this, I didn't come out with it and go, hey, I should write a blog post on this. This is how you should do it, right?
Yeah.
Still working on it. So I'd love to hear feedback too of other.
I mean, Sebastiaan, Docker has about 1 billion repos.
Yeah.
So, what's your sort of take on if you're in a company that doesn't do mono repo or has a lot of little repos and you want to stitch that together?
So I would say it depends. So,
like all good answers.
I mean, if you have a compose file, so it would be running. So that's the great thing, and also the problem with compose is that it's doing a great many things. So you can use compose to build things, so to build your images and to run your images. And that could be in a single repository, but you could also say, okay, so I have a compose file that includes all the options to build my image so that I don't have to pass them on the command line, and I can build the image. And if each repository's artifacts is a Docker image, then you can have your compose file to run the whole stack that just uses those images. And then you have a bit of a separation of concern as to if it's a microservice that one team is working on, whenever they make a change, they can push the latest version of that image to a registry. And if you want to be running the whole stack, you can have the repository that has the whole stack compose file, which would fetch those images and run them. I can imagine that in some cases you don't want to be running the whole stack, or maybe you want to stop out some of the services as to maybe in production you have the database being hosted by a cloud provider, and maybe locally you want to have a more lightweight thing to just get going. So yeah, multiple compose files is an option. But I would say, so deploying the whole stack is one thing. Building the stack is another thing. Yeah.
I think it really depends on what problem you're solving for. If you're solving for like a local development environment, or if you're solving for running a bunch of teams together. If you're solving for a local, like your own personal development, where you're pulling in a bunch of stuff, then I think you want to make changes to everything, then an umbrella repo that pulls in the other repos and then goes into them makes a lot of sense. But if you want to run and you're only responsible for your one thing and the other 4 things you're just consuming, well, you're just going to have the one repo with a compose file, and it's going to look like a compose file that's pulling from hub, right? Like, I don't ever develop Redis. So I've got my Python Flask app and I've got my Redis app. And so I've got one repo with one compose, and I pull in 2 things or 3 things because I'm just using Nginx and Redis, and I don't ever mess with those. I think, and that's probably the easier one. The harder one is the one where I've got 5 things and I want to hack on all of those things at the same time and make changes. And I think that is the either you've got a really good CI process, or you've got an umbrella repo and you're reaching compose in to actually pull all the strings. But yeah, I think 100% it just depends on what problem you're trying to solve.
So there's some tricks you can use there. So first of all, so you don't have to have the code locally to build an image. So if you do Docker builds and you point it to a Git repository, you can actually build without having the code locally at all.
Yeah, I never remember this.
Yeah.
So that's one trick. It will still do a clone of the repo in a temp directory and build from that. But it could actually be an approach as to I have a compose file that builds from multiple repositories and just points to those. And of course, you can have a compose file that points to multiple directories that are somewhere on the file system. As long as the Docker file and the code is in the build context, what it's called, then you should be able to build from multiple locations. So. Yeah, so there's no one answer to all of these because there's so many possible approaches.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of Docker. That's one of the reasons it works so well for so many different people, is because you can fit it wherever you need, and you also can adopt as much or as little as makes sense for you. So I have friends that their companies use Docker in development, and then they still they still go the quote unquote old-fashioned way to prod, just because that company's not ready to do that yet. And they'd like to someday, but that day is not today. So I mean, I think it's optimizing for whatever problem you're trying to solve. And as an individual, you might be solving your personal problem. Like one of the things that I've definitely gotten to in the last, couple months is I want to get my work done, and then I want to go home, even though home is still where I am. But and I think Docker is a great tool for doing that, for helping people get their stuff done and then go do whatever it is that they would want to do. So bake bread or brew beer, or in your case, Sebastian, apparently listen to CDs.
I do so, yeah. Or play synth or whatever.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Do you have a sound? Well, like you're here. Do you need to drop your SoundCloud?
I don't have a SoundCloud. No.
Well, how are we going to listen to the soothing synth tones of?
It's not distributed.
Are you gonna play us out, Sebastian?
I'm
just kidding. I'm just.
All right.
That would have been awesome.
It would have been. If I would have known that you had. Okay, so here's the deal. Chat. We're going to play. Sebastian's going to send me something that he feels comfortable with other people hearing, and next week, or the week after, actually, I won't be here next week, but the week after, when I'm back, we'll play on stream something from Sebastian. It has to be at least 30 seconds.
You already got to look good. It looks good to me.
It doesn't need a video. It just needs. We just need the soothe sounds of Sebastian's soon to be viral SoundCloud. All right.
Oh, Chris Beck, last comment of the day. I don't know if you're trolling us, Chris, or if that's a legit comment.
So the last thing I saw about Swarm was a thing from Mirantis the other day, where Mirantis is reinvesting in Swarm, and the sort of the vision going forward is that Swarm the Swarm API will sit on top of or in front of, or however you want to think about it, Kube. So you will use the Swarm API, and then it'll just run the containers in Kube. So that's the last thing I saw from Swarm. That was like 2 or 3 days ago. So if you search for Mirantis Swarm, I guarantee you'll find it. But Sebastian, thank you very much for joining us today, staying late, and being the first Docker person on here. That was awesome. And thanks, chat, for attending and showing up again. And we'll see you, or Peter will see you next week. What are we talking about next week, Peter?
Best practices for Node.js.
Awesome. I won't be here, but I will watch the video after.
Will be a lot of typing on the keyboard and a lot of hands-on stuff. So come with your questions if you have them, and I will do my best to answer them.
And when are we moving to the new slot?
It will be the 8th of next month. And let me just double check. Yep, the 8th of next month. So the first full week next month will move to Thursdays.
So same time, new day.
just on Thursdays. Yeah. Same
Awesome.
bat channel.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Sebastian.
Okay,
Thanks.